The man who built Russia's war machine just told the world something he was never supposed to say. Sergei Shoigu, former defense minister, decade-long architect of Russian military power, the man who stood at Putin's side projecting invincibility, publicly stated in March 2026 that no region of Russia can feel safe. Not a leaked document, not a whisper from a disgraced general, a public admission from the man who ran the machine. If you want to understand how the most one-sided military invasion in recent history turned into this moment, stay right here, because we are going to walk you through every strike, every breakthrough, and every miscalculation that brought Russia to its knees on its own soil. And if you are new here, make sure you hit follow right now. We cover this conflict every single day with the analysis most outlets are still missing. Let us go back to February 24th, 2022, because you cannot understand where we are today without understanding how absurd the starting point was. Russia crossed into Ukraine with one of the largest land armies assembled in modern history. Thousands of tanks, tens of thousands of armored vehicles, a world-class air force, a nuclear arsenal, close to 1 million active duty soldiers backed by millions more in reserve. Ukraine, on that same morning, was not considered a credible military threat by any serious analyst on the planet. Most expert projections, even generous ones, gave Ukraine days, perhaps a couple of weeks, before Russian forces reached Kiev and the government fled. The idea that Ukraine would one day be launching strikes deep inside Russian territory, hitting strategic bomber bases, oil export terminals, and missile production factories, was not a fringe opinion that serious people dismissed. It was not even a thought that serious people had. Putin's generals planned for a victory parade, not a war. They were catastrophically wrong, and the story of exactly how wrong they were is the story we are about to tell you. Stay with us, because what comes next is where it starts to get extraordinary. The first tremors arrived quietly. In the border regions, explosions at oil depots. Rail infrastructure sabotaged, not by Ukraine, but by Russian anti-war citizens inside Russia itself, members of a group called Stop the Wagons, destroying their own country's supply lines to slow the war. Ukraine was watching all of it, studying, learning. And on December 5th, 2022, less than 10 months into a war that was supposed to be finished in days, Ukraine confirmed what had previously been unthinkable. Engels Air Base and Diaghilevo Air Base, two Russian military installations deep inside Russian territory, far from any front line, were struck on the same day. These were not forward staging positions. These were strategic bomber bases, home to the Tupolev 95s that Russia had been using to launch cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities. Ukraine hit them simultaneously. 3 weeks later, on December 26th, Ukraine hit Engels again. Same base, deliberate return, no apology. The message delivered was worth more than the damage caused. Ukraine had a reach that Russia had never prepared for, and it intended to use it. But here is what nobody fully appreciated in December 2022. This was Russia's gentlest possible warning, because Ukraine was just getting started, and the weapon that would change everything had not yet been fully developed. That weapon was the drone, and here is the brutal irony that nobody in Moscow saw coming. Russia had spent much of late 2022 deploying Iranian-designed Shahed drones in massive swarms against Ukraine's power grid, cheap, hard to intercept, devastatingly effective at a cost Russia could sustain indefinitely. Ukraine had to learn to survive them. And in learning to survive them, Ukraine began to understand something that would eventually terrify the Kremlin. If Russia could do this, Ukraine could do it better. By May 2023, Ukrainian drones were striking Russian airfields in the Bryansk region. 8 drones entered Moscow's airspace, the capital city, home to more than 13 million people, the city where Putin and Russia's wealthiest oligarchs live. And the physical damage was secondary to the psychological detonation that followed. A country nobody expected to survive was now flying drones over the city of the man who ordered the invasion. 300 miles inside Russian territory, a year into a war that was supposed to be finished in weeks. Make sure you are subscribed and have notifications on. We update this story daily, and what comes in the next few months of this war is not something you want to piece together secondhand. 2024 is where Ukraine stopped reacting and started strategizing. Ukrainian commanders had identified something that Western analysts had flagged early, but that nobody expected Ukraine to actually exploit at scale: oil. Russia's oil infrastructure was the financial circulatory system of the entire war effort. It powered the tanks, funded the soldiers, and generated the export revenue that kept the machine running. And it was physically concentrated: refineries, pipelines, storage facilities, export terminals, large, fixed, and increasingly within Ukraine's growing strike range. Over the course of 2024, Ukraine executed at least 84 confirmed attacks on Russian oil infrastructure. 84. Not a campaign, a systematic dismantling. Ukraine's Neptune missiles, domestically produced and continuously improved, struck over 50 targets during this period. Long-range drones hit facilities nearly 1,000 miles inside Russian territory, including the Kirov electromechanical plant, a facility so far inside Russia that its location had never been considered a war risk by anyone in Moscow. Meanwhile, at sea, Ukraine was finishing what it started with the sinking of the flagship cruiser Moskva in 2022. Landing ships, missile ships, submarines struck and destroyed with enough regularity that Russian commanders eventually ordered the Black Sea Fleet to withdraw from its strategic positions near Crimea. The moment that fleet retreated, Ukraine's grain export corridors opened, injecting economic oxygen into a Ukrainian economy fighting for its survival. And still, the biggest moment of the war had not yet arrived. August 6, 2024. Write that date down. Ukrainian armed forces crossed the border into Russia's Kursk region and did not come back for 7 months. Not a raid, not a quick strike. A sustained military occupation of Russian soil. At its peak, Ukrainian forces held positions in over 80 Russian settlements, towns, villages, territory that Russian propaganda had told Russian citizens was permanently beyond the reach of the war. Russia attempted, repeatedly, to frame the eventual Ukrainian withdrawal as a Russian victory. But the arithmetic told a different story. 7 months of Russian troops, resources, and command attention diverted from offensive operations in Ukraine. 7 months of Ukraine demonstrating that Russia could not protect its own territory against a military it had dismissed entirely in February 2022. Ukraine left Kursk mined, booby-trapped, and damaged, and Russia spent months and enormous resources clearing a region that should never have needed clearing. Every day of that operation was a day Russia was not advancing in Donetsk, and Ukraine used every one of those days. By 2025, the drone campaign had become something the world had never seen before from any military operating in active combat conditions. Ukraine had mastered drone warfare not in a laboratory or a simulation, but in the most demanding testing environment that exists, a real war against a real enemy fighting back. The numbers reflect a transformation almost impossible to overstate. Ukraine went from producing 800,000 drones per year in 2023 to 4 million in 2025. Monthly production climbed from 20,000 to 200,000. The production base was not a single government factory. It was hundreds of private companies. Many started from nothing during the war, some now publicly traded on international exchanges. Through 2025, strikes on Russian territory moved from occasional events to near-daily occurrences. Military plants, oil refineries, airfields, one after another hit and set ablaze. Ukraine struck an estimated $12 billion worth of Russian oil infrastructure through drone and missile attacks during this period alone. And then came the operation that crystallized exactly what Ukraine had become. Operation Spiderweb, June 1st, 2025. Dozens of drones were concealed inside ordinary trucks and driven to positions adjacent to Russia's major strategic air bases. At a coordinated moment, the trucks opened. The swarms launched simultaneously. Russia's nuclear-capable strategic bomber fleet, the aircraft that had been terrorizing Ukrainian cities since the first weeks of the invasion, was struck across multiple bases in a single operation. Approximately 1/3 of that fleet was destroyed in a single day, an operation that had reportedly been in preparation for over a year, an operation that Russia's intelligence services, despite all their resources and surveillance capabilities, had not detected. The most audacious single strike of the entire war, executed with the precision of a military that had spent 3 years learning exactly how to hurt Russia, where it was most vulnerable. 2026 did not bring a pause, it brought acceleration. In February, Ukrainian forces struck Russia's missile fuel production plant in the Tver region, the facility that supplies propellant for the missiles Russia uses to hit Ukrainian cities. In March, a microchip and missile component factory was destroyed, targeting the guidance systems that make those missiles accurate. Ukraine was no longer just burning oil. It was dismantling the entire production chain for Russia's offensive weapons. Ukraine's domestically developed Flamingo long-range missile, designed and built inside Ukraine during the war, struck the Kapustin Yar test range and the Votkinsk plant, one of the most critical facilities in Russia's defense industrial complex. On the night of March 8th, Ukraine launched 754 drones in a single overnight operation, more than in any previous single wave in the history of the conflict. Hundreds more followed in the days after. Then came the Baltic. Ukraine's drones struck Primorsk and Ust-Luga, the export terminals that handle approximately 45% of Russia's total crude oil exports, fires visible from space, revenue losses still being calculated months later, and simultaneously, Russia's spring offensive, the campaign that was supposed to deliver Donetsk, demonstrate dominance, and force a settlement on Russia's terms, produced zero net territorial gains in March while generating Russia's worst monthly casualty figures of the entire war. Russia's central bank was forced to raise interest rates to record levels. Regular Russian families are paying at the checkout counter, at the gas pump, in the healthcare they no longer receive because the budget that funded it now funds missiles. Look at the full arc of what has happened, because these numbers tell a story no Kremlin press conference can reframe. Drone production from 800,000 per year to 4 million, with targets between 5 and 10 million projected. An entirely new family of domestically produced long-range missiles that did not exist when the war began. Strike range from the first cross-border hits a few hundred miles inside Russia to confirmed strikes 1,750 kilometers from Ukraine's border. At least 84 confirmed oil infrastructure attacks in 2024 alone. $12 billion in estimated damage to energy infrastructure, 1/3 of Russia's strategic bomber fleet destroyed in a single day, the Black Sea Fleet driven from its strategic positions, the Kursk incursion, 80 settlements, 7 months, Russian territory held by Ukrainian forces, net Ukrainian territorial gains in February and March 2026, while Russia's offensive stalled completely. All of it adding up to the moment when Russia's own former defense minister, a man who spent a decade projecting invincibility, stood up and told his country that nowhere inside its borders is protected. He is right. Putin knows he is right. And the deepest cut in all of this is the cause. Putin sent his military into Ukraine to erase it. Instead, he pressure forged it. He forced Ukraine to build a drone industry producing millions of weapons a year. He forced it to develop long-range missiles now hitting his most sensitive military and industrial sites. He forced it to innovate faster than any peacetime military requirement could have produced. He created the existential pressure that made Ukraine self-sufficient, resourceful, and relentless. He gave Ukraine exactly what it needed to become what it is today. And what it is today is dismantling everything he built. Air bases burning, refineries in flames, export terminals on fire, strategic bombers destroyed on runways deep inside Russia, and it is not slowing. Every month the drones multiply, every month the range extends, every month the targeting sharpens, every month another piece of Russia's military and economic foundation burns. Shoigu was right, no region of Russia is safe, and Vladimir Putin built the force that made it so. If this gave you a clearer picture of what is actually happening in this war, share it with someone who needs to understand it. Most people are still working off headlines. This is the full story. We break it down every single day, and the next phase of this conflict is already developing. Hit subscribe so you are there when it does. and turn on notifications because this story is not slowing down.